Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second half of our program. Swamiji spoke last night, introduced the topic of the basics of spiritual life. We're very, very happy. I mentioned last night again, Swami Tyagananda from our Boston Vedanta Center, visiting us after several years. I was just asking him, does he remember when we first met? He didn't remember. Maharaj, 1993.
Oh, yes.
Parliament of Religions, yes. We were both invited to Belur Math. We stayed at Belur Math. It was actually at Netaji Indoor Stadium for the Parliament of Religions. And Swamiji was then still editor, Vedanta Keshari. And he caught hold of me. And he made me write a whole article longhand on the notes, just the kind of a summary of what took place for that Parliament of Religions, and it was very nice. Anyhow, I was very happy to meet Swamiji because we had correspondence. I used to, I think it was the Mahapurush Maharaj mostly, some articles and things. So anyhow, so we've known each other for a long time, and now next year he'll have his own Silver Jubilee celebration. That'll be 25 years in this country, next year. So he's been here for a long time. He's also become quite a good author. This is several books to his credit. We have them here in the bookstore. The most recent one, it's called Looking Deeply. It's a nice translation and commentary of Vivekachudamani. And then you've done two of the Swamiji's 4 yogas, so far, Maharaj? Yeah. So he's doing his own kind of informal type of commentary. He has on Karma Yoga, which is walking the walk, and Jnana Yoga, knowing the knower, and some other things. But we have them all here if anybody is interested in that. So Swamiji will speak this morning, and there'll be a question and answer session in the afternoon at 4 o'clock. We have some paper and pens here, so if anything occurs to you that you don't want to forget, you can write it down now. And then before the 4 o'clock session, Swamiji will have them all there, and he can go through them and answer them one by one, or discard them if he wants, if he doesn't like the questions. So that he'll have freedom for that. So this is a program. After the talk this morning, everyone is invited for lunch at 12:30. Then 4 o'clock is the question and answer session. Then there'll be a tea break, and then 6:30 is our regular Arati, and then there'll be meditation till 7:30. Then we have a very nice violin concert. And the violinist just came a few minutes ago. It's Milan Radkar. He performed here earlier, at that time with his son, and Debu Naik on tabla, who we all know. He's performed many times, so it should be a wonderful concert. That'll be at 7:30. And then after that, there'll be food for everyone in the basement also. So Maharaj, we welcome you again, and please come, and you'll be in the session.
Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Mahethi Rudrayatte Takshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. With the Divine Consciousness, fill our hearts and protect us. So, in the first part of this topic that we are reflecting on, the basics of spiritual life, we saw yesterday, very briefly, the meaning or one possible way to understand the meaning of the word spiritual, of how, what the spiritual striving mean, what the relationship between the body, the mind, and the spirit, and what the three primary steps are in Vedanta practice: hearing, reflection, and meditation. Shravan, Manan, and Nididhyasan. So we'll see a few more related subjects this morning. But I would like to begin by reminding all of us of this great verse which comes almost in the beginning of this book, Viveka Chudamani. Many of you are probably familiar with it. It goes like this: Durlabham trayame vaitat devanugraha hetukam manushyatvam mumukshutvam mahapurusha samshrayaha. Which simply means that these three things are very rare and which come only through the grace of God. A human birth, a desire for enlightenment, a desire for liberation, a desire to lead, to reach the spiritual goal, and the company or the guidance of an enlightened soul. This verse, I think, is very important, especially for those of us who identify ourselves as devotees. We briefly referred to yesterday on the reality of death. However unpleasant a topic it might be, something that we may not want to think about, and yet it is real. Those of us who believe in rebirth also know that just because we are human beings in this birth, and if we are to be born again, there is no guarantee that we are going to be human beings again. We don't know in which direction and which species our karma will push us if we are born again. Now, it's a little bit of a human arrogance, we might say, that we somehow like to think we are the pinnacle of evolution, that we are very fortunate to be human beings. We probably are, but we don't know what the dogs and cats think. Probably they think they are very fortunate to be. And there is this one cartoon picture that I saw some time back. It had the picture of a school playground, and when the children are playing, and there is a tree there, and a monkey, a mother with a little baby monkey sitting on the tree. And the baby is watching the children play. And this baby monkey is telling her mother, "Mother, I want to go and play with them. And the mother monkey tells the baby, "No, you're not going to play with them. They are unevolved beings. Look, they don't even have a tail." So, even when we believe in evolution, which way we want to put the evolutionary ladder, but we have got to admit that all of our philosophy, all of our thinking is from a human perspective. And so it's not surprising that we like to think somehow that we are better or we are more fortunate than others. In any case, from our human perspective, it seems as if there are a lot of things we can do which beings, the other species, maybe cats and dogs, cannot do. Definitely, our understanding of enlightenment and God realization is something we feel we are more capable of than maybe animals. And so, the probability of getting a human birth again is very rare, considering how many millions of species there are. Now, in addition to human birth, if we have been lucky enough to have acquired this longing or the desire to lead a higher life, a life dedicated to a spiritual ideal, That's even more rare. Even if you look around between your acquaintances and friends, you might find not everyone may be as much interested in spiritual life as you are. So we know that not just some kind of a stagnant piety, which many people have, but kind of what sometimes is called the dynamic spirituality, kind of an active interest in spiritual life. Such people are always going to be few and never going to be a majority. And so if we feel we have that deep inner longing in spiritual life, we are already a part of a very small, enlightened, not enlightened in the spiritual sense, but enlightened minority in the world. That those who think of things beyond this material existence. Now, if you have both these, the human birth and this longing for spiritual life, and we are also fortunate to get guidance or support or be in the company of an enlightened being, then that's the kind of extremely rare combination which makes it easy for us to reach the goal of our life. Each of these things is very rare, and to have all of these things in combination is even more rare. So, as Shankaracharya points out in that same book, Viveka Chudamani, that normally we say a person who takes their own life, that is suicide. But Shankaracharya says, no, well, that's what is death. It's just the separation of the body from the mind and the Atman. But a real suicide is one who, having acquired a human birth, having acquired this exposure and interest in spiritual life, having acquired this company of an enlightened being, still does not make any effort to transcend their limitations and attain that higher goal. If we miss this opportunity, then there is no knowing how many gazillion more births we'll have to take before these three things can come together again. And so devotees try to keep this verse in mind so as to remember the blessings that we already have, and that we don't fritter away these blessings by some mindless pursuits after perishable things. The second thing I want to emphasize is about the goal of life. Sometimes the books might say this is the goal or that is the goal, or you might hear people saying, but I think it's not enough to know about the goal from books. A lot of times we may have heard people glibly saying, oh, moksha is the goal. Why? I don't think anybody else should tell me what the goal is. It's the plain fact is this. We might say this is my goal, but the goal will become real to me only if it fulfills some deep inner need of mine. It's common experience of us that we only seek what we lack. And so we have to look deep within and say, in my spiritual striving, what am I really seeking? I can't seek after God just because the books say so, just because everyone says, oh, that's a good thing to do. Then that ideal will not become real to me. And so the ideal can be defined in many different ways. If someone intensely feels that they lack enough knowledge, or they don't know that they are in darkness, then for such a person, striving for knowledge becomes a goal. If someone feels intensely the sense of bondage, that yes, we are free in many different ways, but there are many ways also in which we are not free. Through this human body and mind, there are a lot of things we can do, but there are a lot of things we cannot do as well. Well, there is gravity to begin with. We cannot fly like the birds do. The human body has certain limitations. The human mind has certain limitations. So if we become aware of these limitations, then we can appreciate what bondage means. It's a little bit like the example given in texts is about a person whose head is on fire. So if someone's head is on fire, what this person seeks most is water or something to put out that fire. So while this person is running about when the head is on fire and someone says, "What's the hurry? Just have a little rasagulla a little bit and then you can go." I say, "No, I don't want anything. So, do we feel that kind of bondage? Because if we feel that kind of bondage, then the ideal of moksha will become real to us. So, what we want, the word that gets often used in Sanskrit for wanting is artha, that which is meaningful. The word for student in not only in Sanskrit but in many Indian languages is vidyarthi. Vidya is knowledge. Arthi means one who wants it, one who wants knowledge. Now, just enrolling myself in some course or going to some school or college, I don't automatically become a vidyarthi. Because even if I'm studying in a school or college, am I really studying to get knowledge or am I studying to get a degree? Because a lot of times people go to schools because, well, I need some credentials, I need a degree, because if I have a degree, I have a better chance of getting a good job and making money and so on. So I'm not really seeking knowledge, I'm just seeking a degree. So I'm more a degree arthi than a vidyarthi. So similarly, moksha, do I really want moksha? That is what Swami Vivekananda asked in one of his lectures. The first thing for us to ask ourselves is, do I even want God? Many of us think, well, we are meditating on the divine, we are meditating on God. But do I want God? Or am I just doing it because everyone does it? Or it's a good thing to do? Or it's something that is good among the many interests that I have in life? This is one of the interests. So, rather than going by the definitions or advice given in the many books about what the goal of life should be, it's more helpful for a spiritual seeker to look deep in their heart and say, what do I want? And maybe in some respect there is a universal answer. And one answer would be, any sane person would say, I want to be happy. I don't want suffering. There I think we probably all share that same ideal. Where we may differ is, what would make me happy? What is it that would take away my suffering? Sometimes in the Hindu tradition, people speak about the Purusharthas. And I've often seen it being translated or explained away by saying, these are the 4 goals in the tradition. No, again, look at that. There is the word artha, just like vidyarthi. There is the purushartha. What it means is that these 4 things can become meaningful. People can want these things. Nobody is asking you to run after them. But these are the things people want, depending on whatever they believe will remove their pain or remove their suffering or bring them joy. And clearly, artha, used in a different sense here, can be wealth or prosperity. So, why does earning more money, earning wealth, becomes a value in life, becomes important in life? Because we feel that the more wealth I have, the more prosperity I have, I will have enough means to procure for myself the things that make me happy, or enough means to remove the obstacles that produce pain and suffering. And that is how then artha or wealth becomes a value. It's not a goal, but it becomes valuable, it becomes meaningful because I believe that it is something that will take away my pain and suffering, that will bring me happiness. Some others might believe, again, based on our own experience, that the more enjoyment I have, the more my desires are fulfilled, that is what will make me happy. And therefore, karma becomes a value in life as well. There are some others who believe, yes, these other things might help in bringing happiness and removing suffering, but a deeper, abiding happiness and peace can come through a strong life dedicated to moral and ethical values. That's how dharma becomes a value in life. And then, of course, there are others who believe that none of these things can bring me that complete happiness and removal of suffering that I seek, except being completely free. Then moksha becomes meaningful in life. So these four are not goals. These are four different ways, at least, in which the human mind believes that this is something that will make me happy and take away my suffering. Now, it's not necessarily an either-or situation. Sometimes we might believe that, well, I would think all of these four are meaningful to me in different proportions. So, sometimes our evolution in spiritual life can be seen by looking at our own, the changes that occur in how much any of these four, how much more or less meaningful they become as we advance in age. So that's about Purushartha. To not mistake it to be four goals, but to recognize that these are the kind of things the human mind thinks about while judging what will make us happy. So, I mentioned yesterday evening that there are the three primary steps in Vedanta practice: hearing, reflection, and meditation. I also said that in the cases of students who are fit for that practice, merely hearing is enough. Now, some might need hearing plus reflection in order to become enlightened, and some others might need hearing, reflection, and meditation, and maybe prolonged meditation for long periods of time before they become enlightened. So, the question is, what is it that determines our fitness? The word that is used in Vedanta for fitness of a student is adhikari, adhikara. In the olden days, that problem was mostly solved by going to the teacher, because there were no schools as we understand them today were. There was no books to read. The only way to get knowledge was to go to the teacher. Then the teacher was an enlightened being, would look at the student and see at what level the student was, and depending on the fitness of the student, the teacher would give the first lesson. That lesson received from the teacher would increase some amount of theoretical understanding in the student's mind. And then the student was expected to act upon that teaching and receive the corresponding experience related to that first lesson. So when that experience, when through practice was received, the student's experiential knowledge, there are these two kinds of knowledge. There is the theoretical knowledge, which is cerebral, is stored in the brain, and the other is the experiential knowledge, that which truly transforms me as a human being. So the teacher gave the first lesson, waited until the student had done enough practice to experience the truth of that first lesson in life. With that little bit of evolution as a result of that experiential knowledge, then the teacher gave the second lesson. Then the student practiced again. So it was a very systematic training that theoretical understanding and experience through practice went side by side. Things obviously have changed a lot. And today, it's kind of a mixed blessing. Today, through printing and paper and now, of course, the internet, there is an easy accessibility of information. Most of us don't even need to go to a bookstore anymore. You have an internet connection, Google is there, and then lots of stuff is available online. You can, there's YouTube and lots of things which can be used intelligently, but there is a lot of other things which can be extremely distracting as well. So we have today the blessing of knowledge or information at our fingertips. The downside of that is that we don't have to wait for that experiential knowledge. So we kind of race ahead, getting all this information from many different sources, while correspondingly there is no practice and consequently no experience. So this abundance of information, rather than helping us, rather than benefiting us, actually becomes a hindrance. So it's not enough to have a lot of ideas. Everyone, and sometimes when people speak about people being thinkers, if we have a mind, we think. In that sense, everyone is a thinker. But only a few people are recognized as like thinkers. What it means is that they think in a disciplined way. They don't think in a haphazard way. Whatever ideas they have in their head, all those ideas fit in perfectly. They know where each idea fits. It's like if you have 200 books at home, and if they're just lying about haphazard everywhere, when you can't find the book you want whenever you want it, sometimes as they say in a library, if a book is misplaced, that book is lost. So ours is like that. We get lots of ideas, we don't know what to do with it, and that's why Swamiji one place said, Swami Vivekananda said that knowledge is not simply this abundance of ideas running riot in the brain. In fact, it would be better if we were more selective about the kind of ideas that we allow to enter into our head and then know exactly what to do with those ideas. Those of us who are like pack rats, who kind of just get even material things all the time, and our garage and our basement is filled with them, we know, even if there are a lot of things we know we have never used for years, or maybe are never going to use for years, still people find it so difficult to throw them away. So, considering the difficulty we have in clearing the junk in our own home, at least with little bit of willpower, it's possible to do it. But think about the junk that goes in our head. There is no, unless you are in a Harry Potter world, there is no way to remove things from your head and throw them away. And so, okay, so the first thing they say is, if you find yourself in the hole, then the first thing to do is to stop digging. So we've already put enough junk in our head. We'll have to deal with it sometime or the other in future. But the first thing to do now is to make sure that we don't put more junk there. And what that would mean is being more careful, being more judicious, being more mindful of what kind of ideas, what kind of thoughts I allow inside me. Sometimes people come and say about how difficult it is to meditate, how often the mind gets distracted. That the mind get distracted is not a surprise at all. If the mind did not get distracted, that would be a miracle. The reason is that we just have to ask ourselves, am I being judicious about what kind of nonsense I allow to enter into my head all the time? That doesn't mean you have to close off all the doors, clearly, but just as we have good, intelligent filters, for instance now, those of us who use computers, we know that there are all the viruses out there. Well, not just in computers, now there is a virus going around in through air also. But just as we wear masks, many of us did most of the time in the last couple of years, to stop those viruses from going inside, we have enough filters in our computers, in our email programs to not allow junk to come in. So similarly, we should have some kind of a filters to not allow more useless ideas to go in. That's the only way to be able to have some chance at having a good meditation or a mind that is balanced and concentrated at the time of prayer and worship. And so that is something that is to be taken care of as well. Only when we do that will we have some chance of focusing on our own spiritual life. So acquiring fitness is very important. In Vedanta, they often say that there are 4 primary disciplines which determine the kind of fitness we will have. In Sanskrit, they simply call it sadhana chatushtaya, the 4 kinds of sadhans. Many of you may be familiar with it, so we'll go through this very quickly, just to we are going back to the basics, so to remind ourselves of the things that we have already read or heard of before. So among these 4 principal disciplines, the first is viveka, discernment. It often gets translated in our literature, oftentimes as discrimination. And used in a proper context, it makes perfect sense. The only problem with the word discrimination is it has also got a derogatory touch around it. And so not understood in the proper context, the word discrimination can be a little bit problematic. So a better way probably to refer to viveka may be a discernment. In other words, the ability to look carefully, to look deeply at every experience, at every situation in our life, because only if we look carefully and mindfully, we'll be able to see what there is. Whether something is good or something is bad, something is healthy or something is unhealthy, what is real, what is illusory, what is perishable, what is eternal. All of these categories will become clear to me only if I learn how to see carefully. So the first important practice is to see carefully. And that's important at every level. Even if I'm walking, if I'm not mindful, I might stub my toe. And if the sidewalk is not really paved well, I could hurt myself. So just as I need to look carefully to protect my body while crossing the street, for instance, or while driving, I need to look carefully through the mind as well to make sure that whatever choices I make in life, whatever decisions I take in life are something that will be good and healthy for me. Now, none of us knows what's going to happen in the future. Sometimes we might make stupid decisions. That's okay. But while making the decision, using the best knowledge I have, the best judgment I can bring up in my mind, I should make a decision. And mistakes are okay so long as we learn from our mistake. As As someone said, to err is human, but to err again and again and again and again, that's stupid. In fact, if we learn from our mistakes, then really more the mistakes, more the learning. Except that those mistakes have to be original mistakes. Now, if we look back at the kind of mistakes we make in our daily life, we might see that most of our mistakes are repetitions. We do something stupid and we do it again the next day or after a week or a month. So if I repeat my mistake, it means I've not learned anything. But if I make a fresh mistake every time, and every mistake I make, I'm learning something, I think that's great. So that is the first thing to learn about looking deeply. That is what Viveka is, and to distinguish between what is good and what is bad. Now, good and bad might seem to be very relativistic terms. What is good at one time, in one context, for one person, may not be so good in a different context at a different time to a different person. So is there a subjective way, a more clear way to distinguish what is good and what is bad? And I think the definition or the teaching that Swami Vivekananda gave can be very helpful. And it's simply this, that anything that makes me strong, either physically, mentally, morally, or emotionally, that's good for me. Anything that makes me weak at any of these levels, that's not good for me. And I think this can be really very helpful, provided we don't cheat. We have to be honest about our assessment about strength and weakness. And if we follow the simple principle that Swamiji gave, we will still make mistakes, but we will make fewer mistakes. We will be able to make better choices, but every time just have this kind of an inner filter saying, is it something that will make me stronger, or is it something that will weaken me? And that might really help in making the right choices. So the first discipline to acquire fitness is this looking deeply and carefully seeing what is what. The second is called vairagya, detachment. It's not enough to know what is good and what is bad. We should have this firm power within us to detach ourselves from everything that is weak, everything that is harmful, and to hold on to something that is good and something healthy. Whenever we make a mistake, it's not always because we don't know that it's a mistake. We oftentimes know it's something wrong, but we cannot stop ourselves from doing it. Sometimes, for instance, my doctor might say that, oh, your blood sugar is very high, so take care. Be careful about the sugar intake. And next time someone brings some delicious rasagullas or some good mishti, I remember what my doctor has said. So it's not that I don't know. My viveka is okay because I have seen what it is, but there is not enough vairagya. And so therefore I say, oh, one will not matter much. Or maybe you just close your eyes and take so. Even you don't know you have taken it. So actually, okay, this will be a little bit of a detour, but I just remembered when I said you close your eyes. Some years ago, when I was returning from Houston at the airport, so the devotees there said, could we just pack, because it's about more than 4 hours flight back to Boston, so they said, could we just pack some food for you? And I said, okay, and I didn't even know what they had packed. So they gave me a small little packet, and so when I was going through this security check, and of course these alarms sounded, and so they asked me to open it, and I opened it, and turned out it was idli, and chutney was a little bit watery chutney, so I think that probably stuffed up some liquid, and they'd also put yogurt, a little bit of yogurt there. And so they said, and I said, well, And I explained to that person, he was probably some Latino, Hispanic person, I think, at that TSA. And so I said, well, this is food, this is this. And he said, well, you cannot take it. I said, okay. I was not going to argue, I was not going to fight about it. I said, okay, if you can't be taken, throw it away. And he was a good man. So he felt bad about throwing this food. And so he said, wait, I'll call my officer. So someone, a supervisor. So he goes and calls the supervisor, and the supervisor comes and then again I explained to him, well, this is the food, this is yogurt. And I said, if it's not approved, I don't care, take it away, I don't want it. Even he was feeling bad about, because it was kind of obviously food. It was almost like some bomb-making material or anything. At the same time, the alarm has gone, so he has to follow the rule. So guess what he did? He looked the other side and said, okay, take it. So I mean, like, so at least it's like, well, I didn't know it happened. That's why I said, someday if you want to take some sweets and your doctor has said, hey, I haven't taken, you close your eyes and eat it. You're like. So Vairagya is important, because simply Vivek is not enough. Because after having distinguished between what is good and what is bad, I must have enough detachment to separate myself from what is not good for me. Now, what is it that will give me? Now, both of these things require tremendous willpower. What will give me that power? And that is why the third discipline is a set of qualities, set of virtues, which are very important, which goes to increase my inner willpower. Beginning with Shama and Dhamma, which really means restraining the senses and restraining the mind. Swamiji mentions in one place that if you are on a horse carriage and the horses are galloping at full speed, then allowing the horses to go at full speed, yes, there is some power involved there, but restraining those horses is a greater manifestation of power. And our senses and our mind are very strong, especially when we are young. They kind of lose a little bit of their power as we grow older. So restraining the senses, knowing when to allow them to go forward, when to hold them, that is extremely important. That is what generates enough power which help make our Vivek and Vairagya stronger. And therefore, control of the mind and control of the senses. The next is called Uparati. Uparati means once the mind has gone in some direction and you want to bring it back, you have enough ability to control the mind and bring it back. Those of you who have pets at home, well, you can't control your cats. I think nobody can control cats, I guess. But if you have a dog, then you know how important it is to restrain the dog when necessary and allow the dog to go freely here and there. And so the mind is a little bit like that as well. So Uparati means allowing the mind freedom when it needs to, but also having the ability to bring it back if it kind of strays out of the path. The next important quality is called forbearance. In Sanskrit, they call it titiksha. We know from the lives of Thakur, Mother and Swamiji, especially Holy Mother, how much emphasis she laid on the practice of forbearance. All of us would like to have a hassle-free life. Who doesn't want it? We all want everything to go smoothly in our lives. But there is no single life who can say with complete honesty that we have never had any problems in life. Everyone has problems. I remember that some almost more than 20 years ago, my first visit to the West Coast, I'd gone to the Memorial Day retreat in San Francisco at the Olima retreat. Some of you may have gone there. And I was really very impressed with this. The volunteers, the devotees there, they put up this huge tent, and so methodically and so wonderfully they were doing everything. It was extremely impressive. And so Swami Prabodhanandaji was the head of that center that time. And obviously I was much younger then. And so at lunchtime, when I sat near him, I was so overwhelmed, and I was going on praising. I said, Maharaj, this is so wonderful. Your devotees are so great. Your volunteers are so wonderful. How methodically, systematically they are doing so much work. And he just kind of nodded and smiled, and he allowed me to go as much as I wanted. And then he said, you've come here for 2 days. Everything looks wonderful from far. He said, only when you live in a certain place, then you understand the practical difficulties. And so, no matter, none of us wants to go and advertise our problems to the rest of the world, but deep down, irrespective of what others might think about our situation, deep down, every one of us knows, sure, there are some wonderful things happening in our life, but there are also some problems. And we have to deal with those problems whether we like it or not. Some of the problems are solvable. Some of the problems are solvable, but not entirely by ourselves, if they depend on factors which are beyond our control. What choice do we have? We can either get frustrated or angry and upset about it and ruin whatever joy that we have in our life, or we can just forbear. We can just say, okay, that's how things were meant to be. So forbearance is a great, great virtue. If we want to have any success in our prayer, in our worship, in our meditation, then we must be able to forbear. Forbearance doesn't mean merely accepting everything as our destiny. That's not the point. That yes, if there are any difficulties, we have to do our best to overcome them. It's not some kind of a passively accepting and allowing circumstances to treat us like a doormat. No, that's not the point. But to recognize how there are some things in life over which we don't have any control. And the more we fight against it, it's more like as they say, hitting your head against a stone wall. You're not going to break the stone wall, you're just going to hurt yourself. And so to know when to forbear and when to resist, that also comes through viveka. So forbearance is an important quality. Think about it this way, the definition that Shankaracharya gives in Vivek Chudamani of Titiksha is not just merely forbearing it. You see, I think goes like this. Sahanam sarva dukkhanam apratikara purvakam chinta vilapa rahitam sa titiksha nigadyate. Sahanam sarva dukkhanam, bearing or experiencing all the pain and suffering, apratikara purvakam, without resisting, chinta vilapa rahitam, without being anxious about it, without crying about it, without grieving about it and complaining about it to everyone. If one can do that, such a person will accumulate so much energy, so much power, which will be helpful in increasing the fitness of that student. So forbearance. And finally, Shraddha. Now, Shraddha is a word that's so difficult to translate in English. It's often translated as faith or deep faith. Shraddha is something, it's a little bit like, what does it mean to have Shraddha that God exists? What it means is that we don't have any proof that God exists. We haven't experienced God ourselves. If someone were to say, how do you know there is God? We probably have no answer. And yet, there is a kind of a gut feeling inside, but there is God. That is Shraddha. That is something that is not backed by evidence, not backed by anything else, but you know it's there. Now that's absolutely important. At the very least, enough Shraddha to be able to invest one's time and energy into that activity. For instance, now, when we pray, when we meditate, when we do japa, when you study the Gita, the Upanishads, or any kind of a religious study, all of these activities need some time, need some energy. And just like we are careful about the investments we make in life, we want to make only those investments which will bring enough return, will enough profit. So it makes sense to say, if I'm investing so much of my time and energy into my spiritual activities, what return am I going to get out of it? It is an investment. Now, that is where we need faith, to know that my own personal time, my own physical and mental energy that I'm investing in my spiritual practice will bring me those returns. Only then will I feel confident enough to make that kind of investment. That is what Shaddha means. So these bunch of qualities, sometimes they are called Shama Adi Shat Sampatti, 6 treasures, help in generating enough power to make my Vivek and Vairagya stronger. And finally, the 4th, not so much a discipline, but a requirement is that intense longing, mumukshutva, the desire for freedom, desire to attain the goal. Sri Ramakrishna used the simple word vyakulata. How intensely do I want to reach that goal? Sometimes it's like you want to go on a long drive somewhere. Your car is ready, the tank is filled with gas, the tank is full, all the provisions are done, and then you say, you know what, but I really don't feel like going. Then none of these preparations are of any use if I don't feel like it. So you might have a human birth, you might have an interest in spiritual life, you might get the guidance of a great soul, but ultimately you feel not worth investing my time and energy into it. Maybe I'll do it some other time, maybe next life. Speaking of next life, one of the first duties I had when I joined the monastery in Mumbai, ashrama, was to sell books. We had a small showroom. You have a beautiful showroom here. That was a much smaller one way back in the 70s. And so one person used to come every week and buy a bunch of books. And I was a novice then, and of course I was happy because that was my duty and I was able to sell more books. But after a few weeks, I gathered enough courage to ask that person, every week you come and buy so many books, do you really read them? Because it seemed really impossible that someone could read so many books every week. And then this person was very simple, very nice gentleman. So he said, Maharaj, when I first started buying books, that was with the intention of reading them. Then over the years now, I've realized that in this life, I'll buy books. I'll read them in the next life. So sometimes that can happen. I mean, it can happen. As devotees, it can happen. Sometimes we might think that, the spiritual goal is so far away that what little japa I'm doing is not enough for me to get enlightenment. And if not this life, maybe next life. But I think that's harmful. I mean, there are at several levels. First, to think that to become enlightened, it's going to take a long time, that thinking itself is the first obstacle. When we sit to do our japa and meditation, what are we thinking? What are we doing? It's like, this evening's meditation has to be done, but after that I need to go shopping, so I keep some, maybe if I don't fall asleep, I'll probably keep some alarm or something or some watch in front of me and decide I'm going to meditate for 15 minutes and then afterwards I have these other things to do. Not a very helpful way to plan that way. Because what it also means is that when I sit for meditation, I've already told myself nothing much is going to happen today. But it's a chore, it's helpful, I feel good, I feel happy doing this meditation, so I'm going to do it, but then afterwards I need to go and do this other thing. Why can't I sit with this feeling every time I sit? Why don't I sit with the idea that if God's grace can come any moment, if Mother's grace can come any moment, maybe today when I sit, Mother will come and bless me. I might wake up a Jivan Mukta. I may not have to go shopping at all. I may not have to do anything at all. I think that's extremely important, that every time I sit, I should sit with the hope that today is the day. This is the moment of my enlightenment. Never with the idea that, oh, it's going to take a long time. Because then we won't give our best. Sri Ramakrishna gives the example of a person catching fish. That when you are there, you have to be ready, hopeful every moment that any time that fish might come, and so you can't afford to be thinking of something else. Hope is extremely important in spiritual life. The moment we have feel hopeless, we have almost given up on reaching the goal of our life. Now, hope and hopelessness, I want to say something very briefly about that. There is this teaching that comes in the Bhagavata. It says, it's a story of Pingala, I think her name was, right? Which says, Asha hi paramam dukkham, nairashyam paramam sukham. That is the conclusion of that story. And that is, which simply means, Asha is hope, hi paramam dukkham. Hope leads to supreme misery. Nairashyam paramam sukham. The state of hopelessness is the supreme joy. So that's what it literally means. Which might lead us to think that some people are always hopeful and some people are always feel hopeless, which is really not the case. The reality is that every one of us, we are hopeful about certain things and we feel hopeless about certain things. What distinguishes one person from another is what is it that I am hopeful about and what is it that I feel hopeless about. Now, a worldly person is hopeful about many things. Oh, maybe what will happen in these midterm elections, I hope this happens or I hope it doesn't happen, and so on. A lot of the things we hope about, or maybe climate change won't occur, or anything. A lot of things we are hopeful about are about things we have no control over. We can keep on hoping, and every sports fan hopes that their team will win. But again, it depends on that particular day how your team plays. Your hope does not change that reality at all. On the other hand, sometimes we might find what I mentioned a little earlier about was hopeless about our spiritual destiny, or at the very least, hopeless about being enlightened today. Maybe within the next 5 minutes, some of us might become enlightened. Who can say no? It's not a joke. I mean, it's true. Mother's grace can come any moment. So, to recognize that in all the realities connected with the perishable world, we need to do the best we can. We need to do what needs to be done. But having done our best, we say, let things take their own course. But about spiritual life, to have that hope that God's grace can come any moment. That is the recipe for success. There is this one favorite verse of mine in a book called the Panchadashi, and I think that can be something helpful to all of us. It goes like this: Yat abhavi na tad bhavi, bhavi chet na tad anyatha, iti chinta vishagnoyam bodho brahma nivartakaha. Very simple, very straightforward. What it means is, yat abhavi, na tad bhavi. That which is not going to happen will not happen. Bhavi chet, if something is going to happen, na tad anyatha. It cannot be otherwise. In other words, what will happen will happen. What will not will not happen. It's a little bit similar to what you heard about ke sera sera. Knowing this, chinta vishagnoyam bodho. Chinta vish. Vish is poison. Chinta is anxiety. Knowing this simple truth, that what will happen, what will not happen, a person becomes free from the poison of anxiety and free from all illusion. So that kind of a mental approach in life can be very helpful. That we all have our duties, we all have our responsibilities. We need to do the best we can, use all the skill, knowledge, talent that we have gotten through God's grace, apply them. But after having done your best, clearly, we cannot do better than our best at any given time. Our best might change. Over time, we might be able to do more than we are able to do now. But at this moment, if I do my best, I can then just step back and say, now what will happen will happen. What will not happen will not happen. So if we can hold that kind of approach to life, then we have the freedom to then be hopeful in our spiritual life through God's grace. And so longing is something that gives us that power, that highest. The example that I mentioned earlier is also used in this sense. The intensity with which a person whose head is on fire, Deepta Shira, Jalarashimiva, that's the phrase used in that book called Vedanta Sara. We also know the story that Sri Ramakrishna told about how a teacher, a student, well, that reminds me of another story, but let me tell you about this story and then I'll conclude. A student goes to a teacher and says, when will I realize God? Why am I not realizing God yet? And then the teacher says, okay, let's go to the river and take, and you know the story. They take a dip there, and as soon as the student is in the river, the teacher holds the student's head down underwater. And the student is like, what? I thought he was my teacher. He's trying to kill me. Whatever was going on in the student's mind. And he's like gasping. And after some time, the teacher allowed the student to come up and then say, what were you thinking when I held your head underwater? And then the teacher says, and the student says, all I wanted was fresh air. I wanted air to breathe. And then the teacher says, when you feel like that intensity that I want God, that is the time you will realize God. So this is the story that Sri Ramakrishna told, but that reminds me of another one story. A similar one student had gone to a teacher, and after doing the meditation and so on for a few days, was really very impatient for experience. So he goes to the teacher and says, I want spiritual experience, when will I get it? And the teacher said, keep on doing your practices, keep on, and eventually you will realize. And he's like, no, I really want to know. Please tell me what more I should do. And then the teacher said, okay, are you willing to do what I'm going to tell you? And he said, yes. And he said, okay, next time it rains, I want you to take off your shirt, go in the middle of the street and stand with your one hand raised. That is a very strange kind of a thing to tell. But the student was like, okay, that's what my teacher had asked me to do. So the next time it starts raining, dutifully, the student goes in the middle of the street, takes off his shirt, puts his hand up and stands there getting drenched in that rainwater. And after some time, he returns to the teacher, and then says, you had told me to do this, that's exactly what I did. And then the teacher said, how did you feel? And the student said, left to myself, I would never have done such a thing. I did it only because you asked me to do it. everyone on the street was looking at me, and I just felt so stupid. And the teacher said, that's a good realization to begin with. All that he wanted was realization. And so he said, the first realization was to know that I don't know. I think one of the great obstacles to knowledge is our reluctance to admit that we are ignorant. And so that's about realization. And so very briefly to conclude, if we have these 4 basic disciplines, Vivek, Vairagya, this bunch of qualities called the Shama Adi, Shat Sampati, the 6 treasures, and Mumukshutva, longing, that generates enough power, enough fitness in order for us to pursue these 3-step practice of hearing, reflection, and meditation. Now, one way that these 3 basic steps get concretized is through specific spiritual practices, which are the best way to know what practice is meant for us is to really learn it from a teacher. Because there are hundreds of books, and the books will give hundreds of techniques. And while all of them may be good and great and effective, how are we to know which is the one that is meant for us? Which is the one that best suits our own temperament, our own orientations towards that higher reality? And that's why a guru or a teacher is very important. No matter what spiritual practice we do, the basic instruments that we have from the time we are born are our body and mind. That's it. And therefore, while we don't have to be obsessed with our body and mind, it does help to be mindful that both our physical and mental health is taken care of. That the basic health requirement can be very important, as much as it lies within our power. We know that if there is a severe headache, then it's difficult to concentrate our mind while meditating. Or if there is too much stress and anxiety, it's difficult to concentrate. So if we can find a way to keep our body and mind in relatively good health, again, none of us are expected to become world-class boxers and wrestling champions, but a good amount of healthy approach to life, healthy food, healthy exercise, healthy rest, and so on, all that can be very helpful. I want to say just a few concluding remarks on the 4 yogas. Swami Vivekananda wanted that to leave behind some textbooks for spiritual practices, and he therefore had these 4 yogas. The first part of Bhakti Yoga is only what he really wrote, but really all the other yogas are mostly transcripts of the talks that he gave. One important thing about these yogas is not to allow them to divide our life. Not to think that, I'm doing a little bit of Karma Yoga now, then now if I go and chant the name of God and do some singing, that's my Bhakti Yoga. If I read a little bit of Upanishad, that's my Dhyana Yoga. Not very helpful to kind of create this kind of compartmentalizations in the different practices. So it's helpful to know what these yogas are. Yoga is not some kind of a walled room in which a certain kind of practices can be thrown. It simply, very briefly again, means that the mind primarily has 3 powers, if you like. There is the power of feelings and emotions, there is the will power, and there is the power of reasoning and logic. And any of the spiritual practices, not simply in Vedanta, in any religious tradition, since irrespective of which religion and spirituality we follow, we have the same mind. And so the mind has the same basic 3 ways of functioning. So whichever spiritual practice predominantly uses the power of feelings and emotions, all of those practices can be a part of Bhakti Yoga. All of those spiritual practices which predominantly use the power of reasoning and logic, they all come under Jnana Yoga. All of the practices which predominantly use the power of the will, as it is expressed in the external world through the work that we do, comes under Karma Yoga. And all of the practices which use the power of the will in the internal world to manipulate, or better word is to probably control the powers of the mind, to tame the powers of the mind, is Raja Yoga. So I use the word predominantly because it doesn't mean that in Bhakti, for instance, it's just feelings and emotions. It doesn't mean that in Bhakti there is no place for reasoning and logic. That's not true. There's enough logic and reasoning used in devotional schools as well. But predominantly, it's this one of these three functions. So that way of understanding can be very helpful. So instead of categorizing any of our practices as this is this yoga or that yoga, we can almost just forget about it. Just see that whatever, as spiritual seekers, whatever we do, that our mind remains at the feet of God, at the feet of our chosen deity, at the feet of Ishta. That the more my mind remains immersed in the presence of the divine, the more blessed my life will be. So what I've tried to do yesterday and today is just share with you a few of the ideas, a few of the tips that I have found personally helpful in my own understanding and my own practice. And I would invite you to think on these. None of these you need to accept just because I'm saying it. See if it makes sense. See if it resonates with your own understanding, your own experience in life. And if some of these tips can be helpful, try them out. If some of them are not helpful, maybe they were not meant for you, like we said yesterday. All of us are trying to navigate our life through this journey, through different experiences. We learn as we move, and as much as it lies in our power, we can extend a helping hand to those around us. And those that have moved ahead, cheer them up. So there is no scope for jealousy or hatred in spiritual life. There is no scope for competition either. We are not competing with anybody else. If we are competing with anybody, we are competing with our own selves. So the best way to know whether we are progressing or not is not to compare myself with someone else, but to say, today, as a result of the studies and the practice that I'm doing, am I a better person now than what I was 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 6 months ago? And if I feel I'm better, I'm progressing. If I feel, no, I was much better then, I'm not progressing. It's as simple as that. So that's my prayer, that through the grace of Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Swamiji, that may we all continue our spiritual journey at best we can, through the guidance that we have received from our respective gurus and from the different resources that are available to us. And through Mother's grace, may our hearts be filled with love, compassion, strength, and wisdom. That's my prayer. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhur.
Thank you, Maharaj. It was beautiful. I know we all enjoyed it very much. There'll be the paper and pens and things. In the in-between time, you can start thinking of questions. Don't leave yet. There's going to be a final song also. And we'll meet again. We'll have lunch. And then everyone is free. Those who would like to stay on, rather than go home and come back, you can sit in the shrine. You can read books in the library, bookstore. and then we'll meet again after that at 4 o'clock. Now we'll have a closing song.
Page 36. Page 36.
Ramakrishna Vedanta